thank you, everyone. My name is Steve Gotz. I'm head of business at DIFC Innovation Hub, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I know we're in the final stretch of day one, and I'd like to think we're saving the best for last. I think we have an incredible group of panelists with us. Jorgen, Euroclear Group Innovation Officer, one of the world's largest financial market infrastructure providers. Nicolas, member of the executive board at Julius, Baer, one of the world's largest wealth managers. And Izabella, Tamimi Group, one of the oldest and most respected law firms in the GCC. Thank you all for joining us. We're here to talk about an interesting topic, and it's also a timely topic. So the process of passing on assets from one generation to the next is as old as civilization. And traditionally, this is a process that has leveraged legal documents, things like wills and trusts, that have been managed through a very traditional legal system that sometimes can be slow, costly, and at times complex. And these methods, while incredibly reliable, they have their own set of challenges that we've been exploring, including things like transaction fees, administrative delays, and sometimes even disputes among heirs. Which is what brings us to today, right? We live in an increasingly digital world. A significant portion of assets and personal wealth are either becoming digitized or are tied to digital mediums. And oftentimes these assets aren't adequately addressed by existing infrastructure, by existing regulation, and that's what we want to talk about today. The crux of today's discussion. We stand on the cusp of an exciting period of time of how assets are managed and how they are transferred to the next generation. Things like distributed ledger technologies, smart contracts, AI, all of these things are changing the way we're managing our wealth and the way we're passing our wealth on to the next generation. And our distinguished panelists here are here to talk about this and share some of their perspectives on this. So, Nicolas, I'd like to start with you. You're, as one of the world's oldest and most respected asset managers, how is Julius Baer looking at the opportunities and the challenges around the future of inheritance for your clients?
I mean, you know, the topic of inheritance is definitely a very important topic. You have to take, you know, Julius Baer as a traditional private bank with a large footprint in Europe. Usually we have, you know, clients that are, I would say, you know, a large portion of our clients are above 60. And as much as we love to gain new clients and to get new clients coming in, if we are not here for the next generation, if we are not involved with the spouses, if we are not involved with the children, whenever there is an unfortunate case of an inheritance, we will lose the client and we will lose the relationship. So this is one of the key moments that we have in what we would call the client life cycle, where we need to be present. Now, what we see is we have this massive demographic shift, which is happening right now. I think in the Middle East, more than $1 trillion, which is passing over by 2030. We see that in a large majority of cases, you know, it's not really planned properly from the client side, but in many cases also from the bank. We have cases where we don't have the right relationship with the spouse, with the children. So having a process which is well prepared and well managed is one of the key components that we need to be on to make sure that we can have a relationship which is not just for one client, but over multiple generations.
And I think that number, $1 trillion in assets getting transferred, and if I remember correctly, only about 25% of clients have a fully comprehensive inheritance plan in place. Izabella, maybe you can talk a little bit about this, right? So you do a considerable amount of work for families within the GCC. I'm curious, what are the intricacies or some of the challenges that are unique to kind of transferring inheritance among the GCC?
I think one of the challenges that is pretty typical to the region is the fact that you have a number of different parties who have interests to assets that are undergoing the probate process, right? The probate process, which is that transfer of title from the individual who had passed away to us. And now what it means is we may have 35 people with some claims to that very vast pool of assets. So the challenges are really how do you then divide that title? And also very often what we see is a Sharia court, if that court is involved, is going to issue an order and say, okay, well, you know, these are the fractions in which those assets will be inherited. But there isn't really a decision about which fraction of which specific asset is going to go to what individual. Then, of course, that's subject to the later stage of the, you know, the asset division and allocation. So there are challenges that we have been looking at. And in fact, I think the, you know, the discussion we're having today is a very interesting one, because the whole blockchain aspect, for example, is very likely to help us, even legal counsel, help our clients really solve some of those difficulties that they're facing now.
So, Jorgen, I'm curious, why is a financial market infrastructure company like Euroclear interested in the future of inheritance?
So let me, before answering this part, I'll try to have a quick step back on and mention something about financial literacy. I honestly think this is a topic of very importance. And we see today when it comes to the younger generation that, you know, they have a big focus on health, climate, ESG concern, but when it comes to wealth and money and how it's transferred, they haven't necessarily figured out yet what's their relation with it. And back to your point, I think inheritance or transfer of assets is a continuous process during a life cycle. And that's kind of very important to reconnect all these generations together, the one that builds the wealth, the one that consolidates the wealth, and hopefully the one that spends the wealth. And everything that is happening in the DeFi space has helped recreate a momentum for people to understand what's happening, understand a little bit what they might be missing out, what might be the opportunities there. And one of the key reasons we are involved together with the DIFC and Julius Baer in thinking about that is reshaping the concept of ownership. And when you think about, for example, in a lot of places where you have a mortgage, for example, in some real estate, and you cannot remortgage, which happens often, well, you have a portion of your asset that you cannot use properly. And that is not necessarily helping to create the necessary liquidity you need for this asset to be able to support other causes. And that might be real for real estate, but as well for everything around museum and art collectors. You basically need to have the art piece for the people to come and enjoy it. You need to buy new art, and you need to maintain that. So speculation set aside, everything around tokenization of art can support you in achieving that. So I think we are in a very specific momentum when it comes to reshaping the full concept of ownership.
Fascinating. And maybe this is an interesting point for Nicolas to step in. So you are steering digital asset and blockchain strategy at Julius Baer. I'm curious, how do you see these new technologies optimizing or improving the inheritance process, or adding new benefits to your clients through the probate process?
So I think I can also step back and, you know, maybe split that into two different parts. The first one is, you know, when we started to witness more interest for digital asset, for Bitcoin and the like, you could go back to 2018. What we saw is a lot of the financial institutions decided just to push back and to say, we don't want to be involved, this is not something for us, and we are putting that on the side. And we decided to take a different approach, because I have to say personally, and with my colleagues, I was in some cases, you know, afraid to see some clients having, you know, $1 million or $2 million equivalent of Bitcoin just on a USB key, thinking that they are completely safe. So we just saw that the need for advice, which is the bread and butter of what we do, was so important, you know, about security, about how do you manage that, about issue in terms of succession, you know, what do you do if you lose the card, about taxation, which is also important, about transfer. So this was a point where we wanted to be present and where we are active as of today. Now, the second one that you asked me is how does it reshape? Being honest, today, not a lot. Obviously there is this huge, I wouldn't say hope, but certainty that at a certain point we will have a proper infrastructure in place, and that with this infrastructure and the ability to digitalize ownership, we can attach all of the associated benefits. We could finally go to something that was popular 10 years ago, which is open banking, and then offer services to all of the clients. This is happening step by step, but I think we need much more to have that at scale.
So maybe, Izabella, this is a natural time for you to jump in. I'm curious, what are some of the challenges to kind of enforcing inheritance contracts during the probate process and ensuring the proper distribution of assets to heirs, especially taking into account things like Sharia principles in the region? How do you think about this process?
Yeah. I think one of the elements that really plays a major role in that probate is the variety of different assets. And so what do we mean by that? Of course, there will be potentially real estate, there will be some cash in the bank accounts, there will be vehicles, there might be intellectual property rights, and there might be then assets in the form of cryptocurrency, for instance, right, or different types of cryptocurrencies. Now, what is there as a difficulty is, of course, really whether we would be able to then transfer the title to that specific asset to heirs. And really we know that with the traditional pool of assets, with real estate, for example, then the land registries, the respective ones, so the land department, for example, in Dubai, would then receive the court order. Easy enough, they transfer the title, right? But then the question that we have been really, getting from clients very often, which is why we are also talking to authorities and to some financial institutions to find a solution, is what happens with crypto? And well, here, essentially, where matters stand is we always say, well, you need to have a dialogue with somebody in the family. We know there is your personal key, but a very good way for you would be either for somebody who would be at least one of your heirs to know the details of who your custodian is, if there is a custodian involved. If there is no custodian, to have access maybe to the way to actually get into your portfolio, because at the moment, really inheritance of assets that are already there in the virtual world, if you like, is not happening the way we would like it. And very often, unfortunately, which is what we're learning from clients who have asset bases around the world. They would have, for example, huge portfolios somewhere in the US and something also in the GCC, and then, the family patron passes away and everybody knows that there was somewhere that crypto, right? But how would the family access that? So I think really the challenges lie there. Now, on the other hand, if we think about financial institutions and regulators, part of the whole value proposition, if you think about the blockchain technology and then let's say assets and that are in the virtual format, is confidentiality, is the fact that the individual who owns those assets knows that there isn't that random access, right? So there is a little bit of that give and take, so it's still work in progress.
So I'm curious, so on that point, so Jorgen, you've spoken about how technologies like blockchain can transform the entire notion of ownership and transfer. So how do you think the technologies that we're talking about can actually streamline this process of transfer of assets? How can it reduce costs of the inheritance process, especially in light of some of the challenges that Izabella is talking about in terms of asset inventory, kind of asset management?
Well, it's a well-known fact that unfortunately, when there's inheritance, there's often a lot of lawsuits and disputes about ambiguous rights, etc. And we can there are plenty of benefits that you can find around blockchain and tokenization. I will only mention two. The first one is basically you have three major activities that you're doing. You're doing accumulation of wealth, inventory, and then transfer. If you focus on the inventory part, and this is the feedback we received from clients, if, God forbid, something happens, a big portion of them wouldn't know what the full, assets are and where they are located, and as you mentioned, how to access them. So being able on a blockchain to have an inventory that is immutable with all the privacy around that, and that can be shared on a need-to-know basis, that's already a strong improvement. So you can manage the rights and the access and the dissemination of the information during all the life cycle, because as I mentioned, inheritance or major life events, what is important is the transfer of assets, the inventory, and that's happening, in a continuous way. And another benefit is the way you can program the programmability of money and purpose-bound money. So basically, imagine you are a high net worth family and you have some pieces of wealth you want to remain in the family for as long as possible. You are basically able to program that and make sure that this piece of real estate, of this piece of art, can either, if it's sold one day, cannot be spent on expensive things, or just can be spent on other real estate pieces, so you can program it. And if for some reason you just want some people never to be able to hold part of this asset, you can have all the embedded KYC and identity inside of it and make sure it's properly managed. And this is where a financial institution like Euroclear can play a role, because at the core, blockchain has been created to disrupt one thing, which is trust. You don't need to trust anymore if you have a proper blockchain that is able to enforce things. But at the end of the day, you need to have an infrastructure that is going to bring all the tokenization capability, the distribution and the custody, to have the asset protection and make sure everything can remain in a safe and secure place. And this part of trust that cannot be replaced today, this is something we provide.
And I think trust is an interesting segue. So Nicolas, what Jorgen is talking about is fractionalization, tokenization, smart contracts. How is Julius Baer thinking about leveraging this technology to deliver a differentiated service? Does Julius Baer become a technology provider? Does Julius Baer think about adopting technology that informs the human experience of the wealth management process?
I think first I would partially and respectfully disagree. In the spirit of making that a bit more interesting. For sure there is a lot of benefit that you can get from the technology. I think the hope that we could, at the end replace all of the financial intermediaries and digitalize trust hasn't materialized right now. We just saw with FTX and with other events that has happened, that you might get some benefit to digitalize ownership. But we just spoke about the fact to be on a decentralized ledger with a USB key and the code which is hidden somewhere is very attractive. But when something happens, you like to call the help desk of a bank at a certain point on find back your asset. Secondly, yes, there is a lot of benefit that we can get from a digital version of ownership. But I think we need also to see where can we bring a difference and where do we just replicate what we have. Typically for large family offices today, we see that some of them are establishing, family constitution, and then they want to, reserve part of the asset for a certain purpose, and for that you can set up a trust. You don't need a smart contract. So right. I think the question still for us is making sure that we will have the correct infrastructure, but also where can we make a difference and where can we have, where can this technology solve an actual problem rather than the opposite?
No, absolutely. And I think this is an interesting question. I ask Izabella. So all of the tools, all of the building blocks to tokenize an asset, to put a smart contract around an asset exist. But when you look at client adoption of these technologies, particularly in the wealth management process, it's been minimal. We see some examples in Liechtenstein, VP Bank has done some interesting things around tokenizing pieces of art. I think Julius Baer has done an interesting project where you tokenized a piece of art and you transferred the tokens to employees. Why have we not seen greater adoption among clients?
Yeah, I think, there are some confidentiality concerns, but also, of course, change takes time. Now, on the positive note, I think, especially asset tokenization is something that could bring enormous benefits, especially when it comes to inheritance of assets that would have that, huge division of title, right? Somebody can then inherit, and get actually a token that will represent their interest in that underlying asset, and they would be able to also then, sell that token. So it's really introducing a lot of options. I think what we are seeing is that authorities are interested in looking into the ability to use technology even in relation to inheritance situations, because of course tokenization can increase precision. So from discussions that different stakeholders have been having, we can see that there is that balancing act between, okay, well, how do we enter that very precise area, but also make sure that there is still a human component, right? Because we're still used to having, the traditional judge that will sit. And then we cannot forget about situations where we have inheritance through will, because there is, a portion of inheritance not really under statutory provisions, but the one that follows wills. And here there would need to be some more developments, and we are already seeing that clients would like us to mention the inheritance of crypto assets. But again, the question is going to arise, how quickly will we be able to have a technical solution for that inheritance to come? So it's work in progress, but there is really a lot of interest because, again, more and more stakeholders individually also could see how the tokenization of assets, for example, could really then give them more security about the future of their wealth, the wealth preservation, and then the passing off on the wealth the way they would like to.
Nicolas, did you have some thoughts on adoption?
Listen, if I just look at today's reality, and for a bank which is very much involved with digital assets, you would say a traditional institution, the first and foremost is education. I think, we have a very, very large proportion. We don't have educated staff that can just help, from compliance officer to regulatory specialist to wealth planner to investment advisor. I can give a concrete example. When I went back to the wealth planning team and told them, listen, I like the bank to have a solution for a succession in the case of digital asset. Let's just take Bitcoin. Okay, but now we take the complex situation. You have a client, he's in the Middle East, but the daughter is studying in the UK and is engaged with a US citizen. What will happen? How do you tax that? So we see that the level of education in the financial industry is not at the right level. So having the technology is great, but you need to have the people to apply that consistently.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen overnight.
I mean, it's a muscle that you need to build over time. Unfortunately, it's not like an iPhone where it's intuitive and you can get it from one day to the other one.
Right. Just conscious of the time, Jorgen, I'm going to give you the last question. And I want to look ahead a little bit here, right? So as technology, as blockchain continues to develop, we see more use cases to evolve. The underlying plumbing is getting built out, right? And I'm curious, as that underlying plumbing gets built out, what do you see as the transformative applications? Like, what other things get unlocked when this technology is adopted at scale?
That's like having your crystal ball. But I think, to connect the dots between what we said, I think we all see potential in the transformative nature that tokenization and digital asset can have. Definitely, there is a big change management component that needs to happen at scale. Nevertheless, we cannot ignore that there's a DeFi world that is happening out there that is growing, and we all have all the technology pieces are there. So now to get the adoption, you have to look at it from several angles, the regulatory angle, the legal angle, the adoption angle. And basically, we're talking about technology where we should be talking about business solution and business value. At the end of the day, holding a wallet or a saving account or mutual fund, that's what should matter for the end user. It's what value it brings, what it unlocks for them, rather than is it DLT, is it modern technology. So, let's bring back the business and the value to the clients to the top of the discussion, and that's the most precious thing.
It's about people at the end of the day. Brilliant. Well, we're just about out of time. I want to thank the fantastic panelists for joining us today and sharing our thoughts. I also want to thank DIFC for bringing us all together today. Please join me in a round of applause.